Watch your dog the next time your morning schedule shifts by even an hour. You probably won't see panic. You won't see destruction. What you'll see is your dog sitting in the wrong spot, staring at a door that didn't open at the usual time, eyes tracking a pattern that no longer exists. That's not confusion. That's the beginning of a measurable neurological disruption, and most owners miss it entirely because it looks like nothing. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. Your dog has spent weeks, possibly months, building an internal predictive model around your behavior. Every repeated action you've taken, when you wake up, when you feed them, when you leave, when you return, has been encoded as a biological signal. A schedule isn't just comfort for a dog. It's architecture. It's the framework through which they interpret whether the world is stable or unstable. And when that architecture shifts, the disruption doesn't begin when the behavior breaks down. It begins hours before you ever notice anything. The dominant assumption among dog owners is a reasonable one. Dogs are adaptable. They're resilient. They've survived millennia across wildly varying conditions. If the morning walk is 45 minutes late, they'll adjust. If you're working from home this week and back at the office next week, they'll figure it out. Most owners interpret the behavioral changes that follow a schedule shift as stubbornness, a mood, or attention-seeking. They believe the dog is being dramatic, not distressed. This assumption feels rational. It is also measurably incorrect, and the confidence behind it is exactly what makes it dangerous. Dogs are temporal creatures. That's not a metaphor. It's a functional description of how their nervous systems operate. Research from the University of Veterinary Medicine, Vienna, found that dogs anticipate owner return times with measurable cortisol spikes occurring before the event itself, not during, before. The dog's body is chemically responding to a prediction, not a reality. This means your routine isn't just a habit your dog has gotten used to. It is a predictive survival map, a neurologically encoded model that tells the dog when resources will arrive, when threats are absent, and when the environment is safe to relax in. When the routine changes, the map doesn't update automatically, it breaks. And a dog operating off a broken map isn't adapting, it's navigating without instruments. The behavioral sequence that follows a routine change is not random. It follows a predictable pattern, and it unfolds across a specific window. Within the first several hours, you'll see scanning behavior, the dog moving between windows, checking usual spots, tracking you with elevated attention. This is the nervous system searching for the missing signal. Within 24 hours, disrupted sleep, reduced appetite, and escalated vigilance. Alexander Horowitz's behavioral observation research on anticipatory dog behavior documented that dogs exhibit pre-event anxiety patterns, timed precisely to owner schedules, meaning the anxiety isn't triggered by what's happening, but by the absence of what's supposed to be happening, by 48 to 72 hours. If the disruption continues without recalibration, you begin to see compensation behaviors. Either behavioral escalation like vocalization and destructive activity, or the opposite, withdrawal. It's the withdrawal. It's the withdrawal that almost no one catches. When a dog stops pacing and starts lying quietly in a corner, most owners take it as a sign the dog is adjusting. See, they're settling down. They're not settling down. In clinical ethology, this pattern is recognized as a stress-induced behavioral shutdown, the canine equivalent of learned helplessness. When the dog cannot resolve the predictive failure through scanning, pacing, or vocalization, it stops trying. The nervous system conserves resources by suppressing output. The behavior becomes quieter, the internal state does not. This is the most dangerous phase of routine disruption, not because it's the worst, but because it's the most invisible. The dog that looks calm may already be in the deepest stage of psychological destabilization, and owners, interpreting stillness as recovery, often do nothing. There's a meaningful clinical difference between a dog that adjusts to a schedule change and a dog that has dysregulated under one error, and the behavioral markers tell you which you're dealing with. Normal short-term adjustment, appetite returns within 1 to 2 days, sleep patterns normalize within 72 hours, social engagement with the owner rebounds, the dog recalibrates. Chronic dysregulation looks different. Appetite changes persist beyond several days. The dog remains hypervigilant or socially withdrawn past the initial disruption window, and small environmental changes begin triggering outsized stress responses. The dog has not adapted. It is compensated, and compensation has a ceiling. Most owners cannot distinguish between the two because the surface behavior, a dog that's quieted down, looks the same in both cases. The difference is what's happening underneath and how long it continues. To understand why routine disruption hits this hard, you have to understand what built the routine dependency in the first place. Classical conditioning, specifically temporal conditioning, is the mechanism. Over weeks and months, repeated sequences of owner behavior become predictive stimuli. The sound of an alarm becomes associated with feeding. The smell of coffee becomes associated with the morning walk. The jingling of keys becomes associated with departure. These aren't just associations. They are neural pathways that the dog's brain reinforces with every repetition until the cue and the expected event are neurologically linked. The dog hasn't simply gotten used to your schedule. It has built an internal clock around it. Breaking the routine doesn't reset that clock. It creates conflicting signals. A cue fires, the expected event doesn't follow, and the nervous system has no framework to resolve the mismatch. Here's a misconception worth naming directly. The common belief is that when routine breaks, dogs miss their owners. That the problem is emotional, longing, attachment, separation. The actual driver is predictive failure. The dog's brain generates an expectation. The expected event does not occur, and the resulting uncertainty activates the same neurochemical pathway as a threat response. Cortisol rises. The sympathetic nervous system engages. The body responds to unpredictability the way it responds to danger, because evolutionarily, unpredictability was danger. This matters because the solution to emotional longing is comfort. The solution to predictive failure is recalibration. Owners who misread the problem comfort when they should be recalibrating, and they wonder why the behavior persists. What most owners don't realize is that their responses to the dog's disrupted behavior are actively shaping what happens next. When an owner sometimes soothes a pacing dog, sometimes ignores it, and sometimes corrects it, depending on mood, patience, or context, they've created a variable reinforcement schedule. Behavioral science is unambiguous on what variable reinforcement does. It strengthens the behavior it follows. The dog doesn't learn to stop the anxiety-driven behavior. It learns that the behavior sometimes produces a result, and that unpredictability makes it worth persisting. The owner isn't a bystander in the dog's psychological struggle. They are, frequently without knowing it, the mechanism sustaining it. The most repeated piece of advice around routine disruption is also the most reliably incomplete. Just give it time. The assumption underneath that advice is that dogs naturally recalibrate on their own. That time is the active ingredient. Veterinary behaviorist findings on chronic low-grade stress in domestic dogs directly challenge this. Without deliberate recalibration, many dogs don't adjust. They suppress, compensate, or escalate. The surface behavior stabilizes, the underlying neurological dysregulation does not. And accumulated, unresolved stress has documented downstream consequences: immune suppression, digestive disruption, and reduced cognitive resilience over time. Time alone resolves what's visible. It often leaves the invisible untouched. The University of Budapest's Family Dog Project has produced some of the most comprehensive research on canine-human attachment dynamics, and what it confirms is structurally significant. Dogs don't simply follow routines. They build an entire internal model of the world around them, a psychological safety scaffold that allows them to interpret every interaction, every environment, every unfamiliar stimulus through the lens of whether their core anchors are stable. When routine breaks, it's not just the schedule that's disrupted. It's the dog's entire interpretive framework. The same dog that navigated the park calmly on Monday may become reactive on Thursday, not because the park changed, but because the foundation it was standing on is no longer stable. Routine is structural, not supplemental. That distinction changes what you do about it. The psychological disruption has a direct biological translation. Routine breakdown triggers elevated cortisol, suppressed oxytocin release, and activation of the sympathetic nervous system. These aren't abstract stress markers. They're a system-wide biological event. Chronic, low-grade activation of the sympathetic nervous system, the kind produced not by a single disruption but by unresolved, repeated disruption, is linked in long-term studies to immune suppression, digestive dysfunction, and shortened cognitive resilience. The dog that seems a little off for 3 weeks after a schedule change isn't being sensitive. Its body is running a sustained stress response that owners typically cannot see and rarely connect back to the original cause. Recalibration isn't emotional management. It's behavioral engineering, and it works through 3 mechanisms. First, predictive signaling. Before a schedule changes, give the dog advanced behavioral cues, a consistent pre-departure ritual, a specific phrase before a later walk. You're not eliminating unpredictability. You're giving the nervous system a new signal to anchor to. Second, anchor routine preservation. Identify 2 or 3 core daily rituals: morning feeding, an evening walk, a consistent bedtime cue, and hold them fixed regardless of how much the macro schedule shifts. These anchors function as stability markers. The rest of the day can vary. These don't. Third, graduated unpredictability training. Deliberately introduce small, controlled schedule variations during stable periods. A walk that's 10 minutes earlier on Tuesdays, feeding that shifts by 20 minutes on weekends. You're not disrupting the dog. You're building the cognitive flexibility needed to absorb larger disruptions without system-wide dysregulation. This is a framework you can implement with precision and track with measurable behavioral feedback. It is not guesswork. Most owners think of routine as something that makes their dog comfortable, a nice to have, a preference, something the dog enjoys but doesn't fundamentally need. That framing is what makes so many well-meaning owners cause unintentional harm when life shifts. Routine is not the language of comfort. It is the language through which your dog interprets reality. It is the system through which the world becomes readable, predictable, and safe. When you understand that, the entire dynamic of the relationship shifts. You stop being an entertainer managing a pet's mood, and you start being the architect of a living psychological environment. Your dog isn't struggling because it misses the schedule. It's struggling because the schedule was its map, and it's trying to navigate without one. Think about one routine your dog is clearly mapped onto your behavior, something small. The moment you pick up a specific bag, the time you always sit down after dinner, the phrase you use before a walk. Your dog knows it before you finish the action. That mapping is exactly the architecture this video has been describing. If your dog has ever shown you what happens when that signal breaks, leave a comment below. What did you see, and what did you think was happening at the time? And if this reframed how you understand your dog's behavior, the next video on separation anxiety takes this framework one layer deeper, into what happens when the person the dog has mapped their entire world around disappears entirely.